This is the GARIS Masculist MGTOW flyers. That is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW. Written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 197, entitled The Impact of Women's 10 Billion Fewer Neurons. Description. This flyer discusses the impact on feminism and for masculist pushback of the fact that women have 10 billion fewer neurons in their brains. It lists, as a result, the many achievement inferiorities of women compared to men, the superior sex. Now for the flyer itself. The impact of women's 10 billion fewer neurons. It's a well-known neuroscience fact that the average size of a woman's brain is about 10% smaller than the average man's brain in terms of volume. What is less well known is that a given type of neuron, in brackets, and there are about 10,000 different kinds of neurons in the human brain, has the same size across all mammals, which implies that women's neurons and men's neurons have the same size. This has profound implications, as this flyer explains. From the above two data, we can readily conclude that women have about 10% fewer neurons in their brains than men. And given that a man's brain has about 100 billion neurons, that's a difference of 10 billion fewer neurons in the female brain. That's a lot. That's like an ice cream scoop taken out of the male brain. Before starting to analyze the impact of this difference, an immediate objection to this conclusion needs to be squashed. Feminists argue that men's bodies are bigger on average than women's bodies, so need more neurons, and hence bigger brains to control these bigger bodies. They point to the fact that elephants, dolphins, and whales have bigger brains than humans because they have bigger bodies to control. There's an easy refutation to this idea of the feminists, and that is the fact that little boys and little girls have the same sized pre-pubic bodies, yet the little boy still has some 10 billion more neurons in his brain than the little girl. So what does men's greater number of neurons imply for society, for feminism, for masculism? One is led to the obvious question: if women's brains have 10% less neural computational capacity compared to men's brains, what is it that women can't do that men can do, given that men have a 10% larger neural computational capacity? This is an interesting question that, as far as I know, neuroscience has not yet given a definitive answer to, since male-female brain difference research is still fairly young. But one can use one's daily observations to give a reasonable answer by asking, what is it in social life that men can do that women can't do, which may be due to women's smaller neural computational capacity? Well, men invent everything, build everything, create everything. Women are dumber than men in terms of average IQ by about 4 IQ points, says Professor Rushton, R-U-S-H-T-O-N, Google him, in brackets, who studied 50,000 male and 50,000 female SAT, that's student aptitude tests, which are university entrance exams, and came to that conclusion, in brackets. Women have a 10% smaller IQ variance. That is, their IQ scores are less spread out over the whole population, millions of people, than men's. So it follows that the morons and the genii are male. So it's not surprising that men have won 99% of the science Nobel Prizes, all the major math prizes, why the term female philosopher is an oxymoron, etc. If you're not familiar with the meaning of the word oxymoron, it's two words that are mutually contradictory. Like, for example, I don't know, skinny obesity. Women have a well-known weaker curiosity about the world, preferring their domestic existence than getting out into the world, as the way men do. For example, my own Chinese wife, a professor, who you would think would be curious about the world, has never left China, not even travelled to Hong Kong, which is a night's bus ride away, where I've been dozens of times for visa and filming reasons. Her lack of curiosity about the world makes me, as a male, see her as having a rather child mind, which is a fairly typical male reaction towards women's lack of curiosity. Women are not good scientists, contributing almost nothing at world-class level, that is, Nobel level in science, and Fields Medal and Abel Prize level in math. Women have won a pathetic 1% of science Nobel Prizes. The only world-class female mathematician I can think of was Emmy Noether, Noether, of Noether's theorem in physics and Noether rings in pure math. Women are, putting it bluntly, engineering fuckwits. All my wives and girlfriends have amazed me with their inability to figure out quickly how some new gadget works. I watch them stress over it, and they often hand it over to me to figure it out, which I nearly always do, and in a few seconds. It stands to reason that women make up only a small percentage of engineers, especially electronic engineers in today's world. Even after half a century of second-wave feminism, in the English-speaking countries, only about 10% of electronic engineers are female, and nearly half of them leave the field once they have worked in it for a few years. So men outperform women in most things, due largely to the phenomenon of GMV, greater male variance, that is, that men's scores on anything measurable are more spread out over a whole population than women's. This is probably due, besides the neural difference, to men having only one X chromosome in their cells compared to women's two. The X chromosome is of average size, that is, containing about 1,000 genes, which in the male are all used, including the many recessive genes, of which there are far more than the dominant genes. When two X chromosomes combine in the female, only one of the two genes, one from the X chromosome of the mother and one from the X chromosome of the father, of a given type gets used, the dominant gene, and the other is not used, the recessive gene. Since there are fewer dominant genes than recessive genes, males use a greater variety of genes in getting themselves built in the womb than females. This leads to a greater male variance over the whole population. So, for example, the morons and the genii are males. Women have always marvelled at what men can do. Today's women are particularly conscious of the wonderful achievements of men, the skyscrapers, the symphonies, the theorems, the sciences, the technologies. They are in awe at male achievements, and at a deep level have a powerful inferiority complex about it. Women have had this feeling for millennia. Then along comes the contraceptive pill and feminism, which tells women that, quote, women are just as capable as men. Anything a man can do, a woman can also do. This is partly true for most of the population, but not true at the genius end of the scale, which is dominated by men. There will always be a glass ceiling at the top end of the performance scale due to GMV and higher male testosterone levels, which make men more aggressive, more ambitious, more dogged, more persistent, whereas women are more wishy-washy and give up more easily, resulting in a far higher male performance record, as shown clearly in the proportion of entries that are male in the Who's Who books. This deep inferiority complex that women have had for millennia was swept away by feminism, which preached to women what they desperately wanted to hear. Women had a cathartic experience with feminism, which inspired them, galvanized them, the same way as happened in the 700s with the Arabs. There's a close analogy with the experience of women and the Arabs, so it's interesting to relate the story of the Arabs. Prior to 700 AD, The Arabs were looked down on as an inferior people by the Jews and Christians, who had monotheistic religions, and the Arabs had more primitive, less developed, polytheistic religions. Muhammad, a brilliant, charismatic thinker, was an Arab camel trader who regularly met Christian and Jewish communities on his travels. He became very conscious of his inferior status as an Arab, and being a very thoughtful person, wondered why. He came to the conclusion that the main reason was due to Arab polytheism. So one day, after a vision he had in a starved state, he dreamt up the Arabs' monotheism, that is, Islam, or Mohammedism. He started preaching this new religion that he had invented, and it spread and spread. And in parentheses, by the way, all religions are human fictions, invented by usually brilliant-minded, charismatic individuals. Every primitive little tribe invents its own gods. Humanity has invented over 100,000 different gods, say the cultural anthropologists who specialize in the anthropology of religion. Makes you cynical, religion, yes? Once many Arabs had become Islamists, their newfound status went to their heads. They could now stand eye to eye in status with the Jews and the Christians. They too were monotheists. This newfound status galvanized them profoundly. They went on to conquer all of North Africa, the Middle East, and even Spain in faraway Europe. Today there are still 1 billion Mohammedists. You can see the analogy. Women have been similarly galvanized by feminism, and it has gone to their heads. Women now believe that they can do anything men can do, and preach this idea to society in general, especially to young, impressionable women. Feminists have now taken over the divorce courts as a result of their new energy, and have become FIPs, that's financially independent persons in many cases, standing on their own 2 feet, beating their breasts with pride. I am woman! There's just a little problem with the above female religion, and that is, like any religion, it's a human fiction. It's simply not true, as borne out by the scientific realities. Masculists, who are scientists, like myself, become really antsy, that is, frustrated and angry, when we hear iscyanate, fairy, PC bullshit coming from the feminists. Iscyanate means ignorant of science, unable to reason scientifically. Fairy, in the sense of living in a fairyland, believing what you want to believe without evidence, just like religionists. In the past, we males just tolerated feminism and its hyperbole, not taking it seriously, dismissing its exaggerations as female ego overreach, knowing that women could never achieve what men have achieved. But now the feminazis have taken over the divorce courts and are causing one married father in 4 to be financially massacred, losing his kids, his house, paying child support and alimony. So men have lost patience with these feminazi bitches and have decided to put their male foot down. One way that masculist theorists like myself use to debunk feminazi bullshit is to smash feminazi dogmas with masculist science. For example, the above statement that women have 10 billion fewer neurons in their brains, so of course they are genetically inferior to men. Women have 10% less neural computational capacity than men, so of course they have more childlike brains, achieve far less than men, and hence have less status in the eyes of men and society in general. In all cultures, boy babies are more valued than girl babies, because every culture knows from long experience that a boy baby is much more likely to grow up to be a highly valued member of the culture than a girl baby, who will become just another baby factory and child raiser, an unquestionably important role, but not status worthy, because any woman can do those things. When feminazi bitches become too uppity, men can now just sneer at them in quiet condescension with the statement, quote, "Yeah, right, that's a typical feminazi statement coming from a creature with 10 billion fewer neurons in her brain. If you want to be men's equal, you had better get a brain transplant with a male brain. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. YouTube channel name De Garis, Masculist, MGTOW, Flyers. Ciao.